Welcome to the LA Real Estate Podcast on buying and selling real estate in Los Angeles. Today we're going to be talking all about writing your first offer, all about escrow with Jennifer Winans from Los Feliz Escrow, and 5 things that happen after your offer has been accepted. What's going on, Sarah? How you doing?
Hey, Tanner. How are you?
I'm good. It's been a lovely weekend. We're having excellent weather here in LA.
So both of us have family in town right now.
Both of us have family in town. I actually just put my sisters on a plane, and I just had the best time with them in town.
And my parents are in town. My brother was in town. He just left this morning. Mm-hmm. So family weekend. Someone to help with the kids, so I get a break. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That was also my sister's thing. So they both have kids, so they left them at home when they came to visit me. So
that's nice for them. Yeah. You need a break from the kids. I love my kids, but sometimes, nice to have a little break.
I love not having kids.
Okay, so real estate. You want to real estate it today?
Hey, the state we're in is real estate. One of the things we got to talk about is how competitive the LA market is.
Holy bananas. Okay, so this is super location to location. Mm-hmm. Right? So we've got some spots in LA, and our market is actually shifting right now. We see a big shift coming.
Yeah.
That can mean a lot of different things, but it also is very area specific. So we see a little bit of a slowdown in the west side. Northeast LA is still pretty hot. And if a house is priced well, marketed well, most of the time it's still getting multiple offers.
I would just assume. It's hard for me to think that any house in Los Angeles wouldn't have multiple offers. I'm sure, in a lot of places in the Midwest that aren't as densely populated, you might get away with having a house selling or trying to buy a house and being the only person who puts an offer. But that seems to me just to be unheard of in LA.
What's happening right now is, so you have sellers that will come and say, hey, I want to sell my house. The real estate agent says, let's market it well. Let's make the house beautiful. Let's do great photography. Let's list it well. And those houses go on the market. They're in a lot of people's price points. People get super excited. Mm-hmm. They get bid up. And then the house that was, say, listed at $750 sells for $900,000.
Right. They get that bidding war.
Right. So that's pretty standard you see that a lot in Highland Park. You'll see that in Eagle Rock.
I hope it happens across the street from me because there's the house for sale right across the street from me.
You could be Tanner's neighbor. And if you need a realtor, you can give me a call.
Hey-o.
I could help you buy. You could live across the street from Tanner. You really love him on this podcast, which I'm sure you do.
You would be so lucky to live across the street from me.
So it's super competitive. But what's happening? So another seller later on will see that $900,000 sale, and guess what they list their price at?
$900,000.
$900,000. So those houses maybe aren't selling as quickly because they are priced very high, and then someone will come along and say, "Oh, there's all these bidding wars. This person's pricing their house at $900,000. I know it's going to go over $1 million. Well, I'm not even going to place an offer. I'm not even going to look." So pricing as a realtor working with a seller, that's why it's so important. But it's also a factor, obviously, when you're a buyer. So you go to an open house and potentially you love this house. You want to place an offer. And that's what it means when it has multiple offers, that more than one person has submitted an offer on the house.
Sure. You and I both are trying to buy this house. Let's say you submit an offer and I submit an offer and it's $10,000 higher. I mean, that could be a scenario.
Absolutely. That happens all the time. And if you go into an open house and one of the questions a good realtor should always ask is, do you have any offers? We always want to know that before we submit our offer, because if we know there are other offers, that's going to change our strategy as to how we're going to go in. Now, often what's happening is because it's such a hot market, real estate agents will do what's called an offer review date. What that means is they want to put the house on the market. They know it's going to get a lot of activity, a lot of people are going to be there, a lot of buzz, but they don't want the first day the house is on the market to get an all-price offer. If they're trying to get the price above ask, they're trying to bid it up. So they want to put it on the market for maybe like a week and a half, sometimes up to 2 weeks, get as much exposure as possible. And they're basically saying, we're not even going to look at the offers for the first 2 weeks. This is what my seller and I have agreed to. We're going to give you an offer review deadline. So if you're going to submit an offer,
it needs to be in by this date.
Exactly. And a lot of people will wait until right before the offer review deadline to submit their offer because they don't want the real estate agent taking the offer and showing other people and saying, hey, we already got an offer for $1 million. We already got it. So if you're going to write, you better make it better than that. Now, here's the tricky thing. I have actually gotten clients' offers accepted before the offer review deadline by being very aggressive, giving really good terms, and trying to talk the seller sometimes with an emotional letter, with great terms, with a really good price, and saying, listen, my clients need to know an answer now. Will you take this offer? And they can choose to take it or not.
It's one of those things. It's kind of crazy because, houses will come out and there's a price on the house that they're trying to sell it for. And it's not always just who has that amount of money first. It's such a complicated thing.
Well, it is. And all offers are different. So you and I could both submit an offer, but we could have different terms in the offer. We might be the exact same price, but maybe you need longer timelines. We're going to be talking about contingencies at a different time, but there's different contingencies in the offer. So when the listing agent, so that's the realtor for the seller, is reviewing the offers, often they'll put it on a spreadsheet if there's multiple offers because it's not all about the price. And we're going to talk about that on another podcast. But
that's the thing that I think makes it so important to work with a realtor. I can't imagine trying to buy a house and not having a realtor because that offer strategy is such a complex thing. I remember when we were shopping for my house, we put in multiple offers on multiple houses.
We did. And the thing with a realtor, you always want the realtor to be looking out for your financial best interest as well as your emotional best interest. So you say to me, hey, Sarah, I love this house. I want to place an offer. Great. A good realtor will tell you at what number they think you're going to start overpaying for your house. And I always really try and focus on that. I don't want any clients calling me in a couple of years and saying, I'm underwater in my house. I owe more on my loan than my house is worth. If something happens with the economy or whatever, you always want to keep an eye on your investment. And sometimes people are just competitive and they just want to win the bidding war.
See, that's not smart.
And they're going to overpay for their house. Now, I will also say to a client, look, I know you love it, love it, love it, love it. Okay. So if you want to overpay a little and still get the house, we can try and do that. But in your situation, there was a couple times where I said, I don't think you should go higher than this.
Yeah, and we didn't.
And you ended up with a great buy, which you now have equity in.
Yep. Super happy. Duper happy with how that worked out.
So that's, with a multiple offer situation, it does become a little bit more complicated. But this is a really good time to trust your realtor on guiding you through what to do. If you should wait until the offer review deadline to submit, or if you should try and be aggressive and submit it right now. And both have their pros and cons. A lot of the times, if I know the listing agent and we have a really good repertoire, we've worked together before, sometimes they'll give me a little bit more information. If they, and this is why it's important to work with a realtor that gets along with other agents. Right. Because if you have a bad reputation, people don't want to give you intel because they don't want to work with you. So it's important. Anyways, trust your realtor on that. And that's multiple offers.
I like to think of multiple offers. It's like, I have a lot of matches on Tinder. And so it's like, how do I want to spend my Friday night? I have multiple offers. We'll go to the same restaurant, no matter who I take out. It's going to cost exactly the same. But what are the terms of the deal?
Here's a buyer's tip. There is never a good time to buy a house. So don't wait for a good time to place an offer. I can guarantee there will never be a good time. There is never a good time to have a kid. There's never a good time to get pregnant. There's never a good time to get married. There's never a good time to buy a house.
There is no such thing as the perfect time.
There really isn't. And the longer you wait, probably the more you're going to pay.
Honestly, the perfect time was always 10 years ago.
Exactly. The perfect time was always before now. And then the second best time is now. All right. With me, we have Jennifer Winans from Los Feliz Escrow. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
So Jennifer and I have worked together before. She is unbelievably amazing, very informative, sweet, and super pretty.
Oh, well, that's lovely.
Awesome, Sarah.
Nice.
You're welcome.
Right back at you, girl.
Well, thank you. So Jennifer, how long have you been working in escrows?
Forever.
I'm sure it feels like that on many Monday mornings, right?
Yeah, it's been 20 plus years.
Oh my goodness.
My very first job out of high school at 18 was in escrow.
Oh, wow.
Wow. And that was only 5 years ago. Wow. Amazing.
Thank you.
The timelines don't match up, Jennifer. So
that's right. No, believe it or not, it's the oil of Olay, girl.
Right.
Hey, Jen, what do you feel like is the first question that you get about escrows?
Paperwork. Definitely like the open. Yeah. You know, especially when buyers and sellers go in, it's overwhelming. You've got the disclosures coming from, the agent side, and then you've got opening package coming in from the escrow side. And it's just it's overwhelming, when you're buying a home.
So when we as agents have an accepted offer, just, basic info, the first thing we do is we send that accepted agreement to escrow. So that's the RPA, the residential purchase agreement. We send it to escrow, and escrow does their thing. So escrow is an independent third party, and they're there to keep the best interest of the buyer and the seller. Right, Jen?
That is correct. We do work on behalf of the buyer and the seller and not the agents. Our principals to the contract are our buyers and sellers.
So can you give us a little bit of an idea of what's in the opening package? So say someone's placed an offer, they've been told their offer has been accepted, the realtors have sent the contract to escrow. What's the first thing that escrow does, and what do they receive?
The very first thing that we generally try to do is we'll reach out to the agents for the contact information for the buyer or the seller. We'll open up title. We send our wiring instructions to the buyer. Order NHD, make contact with the lender if there is one, if it's not an all-cash transaction, and just try to round up as much information of who our players are before we start typing the escrow.
And NHD, for anybody that doesn't know, is the natural hazard disclosure?
Correct. And that report discloses 7 zones that the seller is required to disclose to a buyer if it's located in.
That's things like if the house happens to be in a floodplain and things of that nature, right?
Yes, that is correct. So the zone disclosure, without going into too much detail, would be flood, area flood, potential flooding, high fire severity zone, earthquake fault zone, seismic hazard, liquefaction, etc.
So now you mentioned, Jen, when somebody has a contract accepted, they open escrow, that you also verify wiring the deposit in. So the deposit is generally 3% of the purchase price that needs to go into escrow, usually in the first 3 business days. And Jen, we do have some fraud concerns in our industry. So what are some things that escrows do to maybe protect that money?
Well, our escrow at Los Feliz Escrow, the contract does default to 3 business days. So all of your contingency dates in a contract are calendar days, but your earnest money deposit is business days, and it is 3 days. So we send out our wiring instructions. And because cyber fraud in our industry really, truly is so real, I mean, not just in our industry, but every industry, what we do is we send our wiring instructions to the buyer only. We will never send wiring instructions to agents or anybody else. And we send those via an encrypted email, and then we follow up with another email with a password. And the buyer must call my office and give us the password in order to obtain our account number.
That's great. And I usually have my clients just again, right before they are about to wire the money, call again from a number that I give them just to triple verify. It seems a little tedious, but I always want to keep my my clients in the best way possible to protect that cash. And especially at the end too, because at the end of escrow, when they're depositing the rest of their down payment, it can be a huge chunk of money.
Yeah, we always it's the same procedure on closing funds as it is for the EMD, the earnest money deposit. We again will do the same form of protection where if they don't have them from the beginning, we'll just go ahead and resend them out encrypted with a different passcode, and they'll be required to call in. And it is tedious, but it really truly is for their protection.
And switching gears a little bit, can you explain how the title officer and escrow work together and who does what?
The title officer and the escrow officer's relationship is really essential to the transaction. So you kind of deal more with like the title rep end of it, but the title officer and the escrow officer, we work together to clear any liens, make sure that, we're able to deliver a clear title to a buyer. Not all prelims are just one conventional mortgage payoff. There can be some uninsured deeds that have been recorded, which means that maybe there was a deed that somebody conveyed title to somebody else with no title insurance. So I work as an escrow officer to prepare all those documents to be able to deliver the clear title.
So I've gone through this entire process and I'm lost. When you say you're clearing up additional liens, what does that mean?
So let me give you just a really quick example. I'll give you the Reader's Digest version. I currently have a file right now where the husband and wife, it was a divorce situation, and he liened the property to buy her out. So I have to go in and I have to prepare what we call substitution of trustee full reconveyance. And then he needs to complete a demand whether he's owed money on the property or not. So those reconveyances, the title company wants to make sure that whoever recorded those isn't owed any money.
So basically a lien on the property is someone is owed money and they're putting it on title that if that property is ever sold, they need to get paid first before the seller makes money. Is that correct?
Correct. That could even be a franchise tax board, an IRS, any type of lien that's been recorded against the property.
How often is it that you would come across a house that there are these additional liens on?
I've got about 4 of them right now, but the buyer gets a copy of the prelim, and they have to approve or disapprove that as part of their contingencies. So with regards to the prelim and clearing of liens, the buyer doesn't really get too involved in that. That's more of a title officer and escrow officer function. What I do as the escrow officer is I work closely with title and the seller to be able to give them the documents to clear the lien so that we can deliver clear title to the buyer.
The whole purpose of escrow is to make sure not only is the money there from the buyer's end, but from the seller's end that the house is clear and able to enter into this transaction, right?
And to make sure that there's proceeds to actually pay the liens of record.
Right, because actually someone could sell a house and with the fees and closing costs could actually not be able to sell because they would end up owing money or a giant IRS lien, or someone owes a lot of child support,
exactly. Yep.
Are these the kinds of things that would delay a closing date once you've entered into escrow?
Well, the one thing I will say, this kind of brings me into like what type of things can kind of like delay the closing date, and it would be a buyer or seller like not getting us the information that we send out in a timely manner. So I can't tell you how important it is once you get your opening package from escrow to try to complete it and get it back to us as soon as possible, because with that information and all the forms that are included, that's going to tell me, is it the seller's primary residence? How many liens are on the property? A lot of people don't know, like with a seller, if you have an equity line of closure, even if there's a zero balance, it still needs to be closed because it's a lien against the property. So there's a lot of checks and balances with the escrow paperwork, and it's really essential on our end that we get it back as soon as possible.
And then I always tell my clients, too, this is so important for everything you do the second you open escrow. If you're given a document to fill out and return for your lender, for your mortgage broker, for your realtor, you try and do it as soon as possible. Tanner Thomason.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah, that is probably one of the most sage advice you can give a client. If a lender sends you a document, if you get something from a disclosure or from escrow, a few of them, like a notary on the grand deed, I can wait on that. But all the other ones are really pertinent to how the file gets set up. One thing I can say too is, calling in credits at the last minute. That's a big no-no.
What does that mean, calling in credits at the last minute?
So, for instance, let's say that Sarah's representing a buyer and the seller and the buyer negotiate a credit. And we are either at loan documents or loan documents are signed, and all of a sudden the agent says, and this never happens in Sarah's world, but somebody calls and says, oops, I forgot there's a $5,000 credit from the seller. So what happens is that now we have to go back to the lender. We've got to disclose it. They have to take it back to underwriting. Underwriting has to approve it, and then we go from there. So that can delay a close. And
it can delay it by a while. So from when the buyer signs loan documents, usually it's about, we could potentially fund the next day and then close the day after that. So every single thing in escrow kind of sets off a chain of events. And if the chain of events is stalled or slowed, then that changes closing date. So
it sure does.
Jen, you've been so informative.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you so much for spending some time with us today. I'm sure we're going to have you on again because you were amazing. That's Jennifer Winans from Los Feliz Escrow. Thank you.
All right, you guys. Have a great day.
Here's a buyer's tip. Online valuation estimates. If you're using the many house apps to see, and there's an estimate of the house's value, they might not be accurate, so always trust your realtor. These websites use algorithms that are based on a computer. They do not see the interior of the house. They don't know the condition, and there's a lot of unknowns to the house that they don't have access to. So although that can be a guide, trust your realtor when it comes to price.
Okay, talking all about escrow today. We're going to talk about 5 things that happen after your offer has been accepted. Number 1, you've got escrow open. The buyer has 3 business days to wire money into an escrow account. We're literally talking about the money for the house.
Yeah, so this is your deposit, which is generally about 3%. Mm-hmm. Sometimes people ask for more, but we're seeing standard 3% across the board for the most part. And that money, so once your offer has been accepted, the buyer wires 3% into an escrow account. And we've already talked a little bit about fraud, how important it is to verify these escrow information, the escrow information, the account number, but usually 3 business days. So it's important as a buyer to know you should have that money fairly liquid.
Yeah, be ready.
Be ready with the cash. Make sure you don't have to sell investments. Make sure the money isn't out of state or isn't out of the country.
Right.
That happens a lot. We have people that live from other countries. I'm Canadian. Mm-hmm. So, make sure that money is in the States, is there, it's liquid, it's ready to go.
Got to have that money. It's got to be ready to go. Just to really hammer on something Jennifer mentioned earlier, escrow is that independent third party. It's not like you're putting money in the seller's hands at this point.
Right.
It's sitting in escrow.
Right. And we've also talked about fraud, but just one more time before wiring any money, always make sure that you talk with your realtor, escrow, and you follow their safety procedures because we do get fraud. So we always want to make sure that the buyer is super duper protected.
Yep. Trying to protect the buyer here. Once you get that money into escrow, the next thing that happens is title. They start working on that chain of title. They're going to get a preliminary title report to check for liens, just to see if there's any funny business going on with the house.
Right. So to make sure that when you buy the house, there's a clean, what we call title, which is the chain of someone's ownership to title. So basically, and we're going to get into that on our next podcast, actually. We have Zoe Schulman who coming to talk all about title, which is super duper exciting. But the preliminary title report, that happens.
They give you the basics. They let you know what we're looking at here.
Right.
After that happens, your mortgage broker is going to send out a buyer's package to start working on the loan.
Now, the buyer's package is a big bunch of papers.
Huge stack of documents.
So important
it's
to get
annoying.
this. It's annoying.
It's so annoying.
It's so important to get this signed and back to your mortgage broker as soon as possible. Now, Tanner, when you bought your house,
yes,
I said, Tanner, here's your loan package.
Yep.
Let's sit through it and go through it right now. And I'll take it with me back in my car and drop it off. And Tanner said, no, it's cool. I'm going to sign it over the weekend. And I checked in with him the next weekend, and I don't think you'd opened it yet.
No, That's not entirely true. I got it done really quick. I got it done fast. Look, there's what we understand. There's people who don't work in real estate understand is like turning this around quickly. But then people in real estate, I'm talking about our escrow people, our loan people, our real estate agents, they want you to they want to hand this document to you, and then they want to turn a circle, and then they want you to hand them the document back fully signed and completed.
And this is a big package. So, long story short, what I'm trying to say is be proactive, get this stuff signed as soon as possible. If you have questions on your loan paperwork, call your mortgage broker, your lender, your loan officer immediately. Call them and ask those questions. You should understand what you're signing. And it is the loan officer's job to explain this paperwork to you, because this is lender paperwork. Yeah. This isn't escrow paperwork. This is not, your realtor's paperwork. This is all to do with your loan. So go through it, ask your loan officer any questions on it.
Yeah, hopefully, and a good loan officer is important there, because so much of it is very complicated, and you're going to have questions, which is fine. After you start working on that buyer's package, escrow instructions are going to be sent out with terms of the agreement and proof of deposit. They want to know that the money's there.
Right, so the money's been received from escrow, and they'll have a deposit of that the money's gone into their account. And escrow instructions basically are just, in layman's terms, what is in the agreement between the buyer and the seller. So it'll have the amount of the purchase. It's going to have the contingency dates and all the other information as far as the sale. It's just a
nice
list and typed out.
List of information and agreements about the sale. And then after that, the buyer and sellers, their agent starts working together to arrange all the inspections, the appraisals. I know one of the things that you build into all of yours is tenting of that house for here in LA.
Yeah, so we have a lot of
termite damage,
termites. Right? Yeah, they're in almost all the houses in LA. Out of all the escrows I've done, there have only been a handful of houses that didn't have termites.
Some kind of termites.
They're everywhere.
It's just common.
They're everywhere. So the agents work together to arrange inspections, to make sure that usually both agents are there during inspections. We're going to have an episode just for inspections in the future.
Well, and I just want to give like a real quick, for somebody who's listening, they're like, inspections, what do I need? Well, not only is it inspecting that literally the house is as described, but like, for instance, my inspection, there was something where they're like, hey, this chimney, it works, it's fine, but if you plan on using it a whole lot, you're probably going to want to like get this part of the chimney cleaned and worked on, but they give the buyer that information.
Absolutely.
That's where you learn like, oh, the roof on this house is fine and great, but but in another 10 years, you might want to think about replacing it. That's the information that inspections is going to give you.
And we're actually going to be speaking a lot about contingencies and inspections on our next podcast.
Big thanks to Jennifer Winans from Los Feliz Escrow, talking to us all about escrow. Very important part of the process. That independent third person protecting the buyer and the seller.
So important.
The condom of the home buying process.
And on our next podcast, we'll be talking with Zoe Schulman from Stewart Title, who's also amazing. Thank you guys so much for listening to the LA Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Skelton, and I'm here with my man.
Hey, my name's Tanner Thomas, and woo-woo.
Thank you for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.